We're going to show you some very important and startling videotapes. What you see could have a dramatic impact on the lives of thousands of people. Men and women accused of child abuse, on the word of young children. When children tell stories of being sexually abused by adults, should we believe them? There's now convincing scientific evidence that the answer is not necessarily.
Now, there's no question about it. Some children will always tell the truth, and child abuse is a reality. But what researchers are proving is that some kids can be influenced to make up and then actually believe stories that never really happened. And tonight you'll see this with your own eyes. As John Stossel reports, the findings could change the outcome of sexual abuse cases which rest on a child's testimony.
In Lowell, Massachusetts, Shirley Souza watches while her husband Ray tends his vegetable garden. Looks like a normal suburban scene, but the Souza's life is anything but normal.
There's a half a dozen cucumbers.
My phone's ringing.
Several times a day, the phone rings because the State Department of Corrections wants each of them to face the camera attached to the phone.
Shirley Souza, 285 Princeton Boulevard, Lowell, Mass.
The Souzas are prisoners in their home. They're under house arrest. It's part of the 9 to 15-year sentence they received for molesting their 2 grandchildren. The first charges came in a letter from the district attorney.
I came home from work, and I walked in, and Raymond said, I wasn't going to show this to you, but you better look at it. And I couldn't believe it. When I looked and I read it, I just...
Can you imagine myself or any human being putting your head in a vagina, or sticking toes there, or touching different places, or putting a fist up their anus? It just wouldn't make it. Wouldn't there be some sort of serious damage? Wouldn't you notice right away?
Every year, thousands of people like the Souzas are convicted of child abuse, even though there's no direct physical evidence. They're convicted simply on the word of 4- and 5-year-old kids. Conventional wisdom is that kids that age wouldn't make such things up. They simply don't know enough about sexuality to come up with detailed accounts of sexual abuse. But then Cornell University professor Stephen Ceci read the testimony of some well-known molestation cases and concluded that interviewers had led the kids on by asking suggestive questions. The interviewers could say, how else can we get this information out? Because the kids won't volunteer it.
The problem is that from a research standpoint, we are now discovering that if you put kids who were not abused through the same kind of highly leading, repetitive interview, some of those children will also disclose events that seem credible, but in fact are not born in actuality.
Now, others have suspected this, but Ceci decided to test that theory. He set up an experiment known as the Sam Stone study. He told a classroom full of 4-, 5-, and 6-year-olds that a man named Sam Stone would come to their class and that he was very clumsy. Then the man came in, stayed a few minutes, and left. That's it. He didn't do anything clumsy. Then, 4 times in the next few months, half the kids were asked leading questions about the man's visit.
Do you remember when Sam Stone came to the school and he broke that toy? Did he do it on purpose or was it an accident? Well, he didn't break a toy. So it's highly suggestive, erroneously suggesting questioning.
After that, another interviewer simply asked,
I wasn't there that day, and I want to know everything that happened that day that Sam Stone came to visit. Can you tell me what happened?
This little boy said Sam Stone was reading a book during the visit to the classroom.
He was doing it so fast that he ripped one of the pages.
Really? Mm-hmm. Did he say...
This girl said Sam Stone threw dolls and books in the air while he was in the class.
Well, when your teacher saw that he was throwing things in the air, what did she say?
Then you need to go.
You need to go?
Yeah, but keep on ripping our stuff.
Just asking leading questions inspired most of the kids to make stories up.
In real-life cases, though, are the investigators as suggestive as your testers are?
What we do is a pale version of what happens in real cases. It doesn't come close, for example, to what was done in the Kelly Michaels case.
The Essex County Prosecutor's Office says 26-year-old Margaret Kelly Michaels is a manipulative, sadistic child...
Preschool teacher Michaels was convicted of molesting 19 children. molesting them in bizarre ways, and in the middle of this crowded New Jersey school without any teacher or parent noticing anything. She served 5 years in jail, until this year when her conviction was overturned by an appeals court that questioned the reliability of the children's testimony.
One day you're getting ready for work, making coffee, minding your business, trying to get along as best you can, being a reasonable, decent, honorable citizen, and the next minute you're an accused child molester with the most bizarre... I had never even heard of such things even being done.
They say you inserted objects, including Lego blocks, forks, spoons, serrated knives into their anuses, vaginas,
and a
penises,
sword.
And a sword.
Yeah.
That you made children drink your urine, that you made kids take their clothes off and lick peanut butter off them. It's very hard to believe, yet the jury believed it, and not you.
No one is willing to doubt a child. And I think that's how the state won their case. They didn't have to present a credible case of how it could happen or recreate the scene of the crime or even presenting witnesses, but just they knew if they presented these little children saying, yes, Kelly was a bad person and she hurt me at this school, that no one would dare question that.
She has a point. This past decade has seen a skyrocketing number of molestation claims, often against family members like the Sousas and against daycare operators like McMartin in California and Little Rascals in North Carolina. All these cases are based primarily on the word of children who, after the fact, had repeatedly been asked questions like this.
Do you remember that time when Mr. asked you to stick his penis in your mouth? Okay.
None of the child abuse investigators would agree to be interviewed for this story. Some clearly go too far.
You're pressing your pee-pee against me, you know. It feels good when you do that. Maybe, is that what they did too?
Steve Cece says the questioning in the Kelly Michaels case was just as leading as this.
They say to the child, we want you to tell us what Kelly did. The kid says, I don't remember. Oh, yes, you do. You remember. No, I don't remember. You do so. We know you remember. At this point, the child's crying. I want to get out of here. You're not going anywhere till you tell us what we know you want, what we know you know.
Basically, we're barraged with questions and coerced, manipulated, begged, made to feel guilty. It just was disgusting.
But where would the kids come up with saying things like, she put the knife in my vagina, or she covered me with peanut butter?
Mm-hmm. Children have incredible imaginations, and it's not out of the realm. Anybody who is a parent who is honest knows what kids are capable of saying.
Ray and Shirley were astonished when they heard their grandchildren's testimony.
They said we used a machine as big as this whole house on them to violate them. We had a cage in the cellar that we locked them up. Never produced nothing.
But why would kids make such things up? That's what convinces juries. You hear those stories and you say, okay, maybe it's not all true. Maybe the machine wasn't as big as a house. Maybe Kelly Michaels didn't smear them all with peanut butter. Teachers would have smelled that. But there must be some truth to it. How could children come up with so many inventive, kinky activities and describe them with so many details unless something really happened? It's a persuasive argument till you hear about Cece's next experiment. He had researchers ask 4- and 5-year-olds to pick a card out of a deck of 10. On each card was a question.
Okay, Derek. This one says, have you ever seen a baby alligator eating apples on an airplane?
No.
No? Have you ever had your finger caught in a mousetrap and had to go to the hospital?
No.
No? Your class and...
At first, almost all the kids say no.
Mm-mm.
But then, once a week for the next 10 weeks, they ask the question again. No coercion, no leading questions, as in the child abuse cases. They just gently repeat the question.
You went to the hospital because your finger got caught in a mousetrap. Did that happen?
Uh-huh.
Yeah?
By week 4 or 6 or 10, most of the kids are saying, yes, it happened. And not just saying yes, but giving such precise information about it that you'd think it must have happened.
Did it hurt?
Yeah.
Yeah? Who took you to the hospital?
My daddy, my mommy, my brother.
So where in your house is the mousetrap?
It's up at down in the basement.
Down in the basement? What is it next to in the basement?
It's next to firewood.
Anyway, what you see here is a child who's given you a lot of perceptual detail. He's telling you where the mousetrap was. It was next to a wood pile in the basement. He had gone down there because he wanted to tell his dad, who was down there collecting firewood, that he was ready for lunch. He gets in an argument with his brother Colin, which he later goes on to describe. They were fighting over some action figure. Colin pushes him next to the wood pile. He doesn't see where his hand's going, and it gets caught in a mousetrap.
Were you surprised at the answers you got?
I think it's fair to say that my colleagues and I were absolutely shocked that by the 10th week, not only were they assenting to some of these things that didn't occur, but they were giving very coherent narratives, highly elaborated narratives that are, I think, quite persuadable.
By the time I met the same boy, it was weeks after the experiment, but he still could give lots of convincing details about things that never happened.
Was there a time when you got your finger caught in a mousetrap and had to go to the hospital? Wow, which finger was it?
Remember, this is the result after a researcher simply asked the question once a week for 10 weeks. In real abuse cases, kids are questioned for years, often by parents, doctors, then by the investigator, perhaps a therapist, then by lawyers.
Who went with you to the hospital?
My mom and my dad and my brother Colin, but not my baby. He was in my mom's tummy.
Your baby.
This boy's testimony is even more remarkable because just a few days earlier, his father had discussed the experiment with him. He'd explained that it was just a test and the whole mousetrap event had never happened. The boy agreed it was just in his imagination. Still, listen to this.
Let me ask you, did your father tell you something about the mousetrap finger story?
No,
Is it true? Did it really happen?
It wasn't a story. It really happened.
It's really happened? You really got your finger caught? It's really happened?
Yeah.
I assume the child isn't lying. They aren't intentionally making up stories.
Absolutely. I think they've come to believe it. It is part of their belief system.
Some experts believe they'd come closer to the truth using anatomically correct dolls. With dolls, they wouldn't have to ask so many questions. But Cece's colleague, Dr. Maggie Brook, conducted tests that led her to conclude using dolls also leads kids on.
I would think anatomically correct dolls would be a good, neutral way to ask questions.
I thought the very same way, but after having had this experience, I'm not quite sure how you do that.
Brook had this pediatrician add some extra steps to his routine physical examination of preschool kids. He measures the child's wrists with a ribbon. He puts a little label on the child's stomach, and he tickles the child's foot with a stick. Never does the doctor go anywhere near the child's private parts. Then, right after the exam, using an anatomically correct doll, Brook asks leading questions about the doctor's exam.
Can you show me on the doll how Dr. Emmett touched your vagina?
No, he didn't tell my vagina.
He didn't?
The child tells the truth. But just a few days later, Dr. Brook and the child's father again ask about the doctor's visit. It's a different story. Before Brook has a chance to even bring out the doll, the child shows how the doctor had strangled her with the ribbon.
You put that around your neck? Like that?
Tight. So tight.
And watch what happens when the doll's brought out. She's asked to explain what the doctor did that day.
So what did he do?
He put a stick in my vagina.
He put a stick in your vagina?
Yeah.
Just like that?
It gets even more violent. She claims the doctor hammered the stick into her vagina. Then she shows how the doctor examined her.
He looked where?
My honey.
He did look in your hiney?
Of course, none of it is true. Dr. Brook found that when dolls were used, half the kids who'd never had their private parts touched claimed the doctor had touched them. These tests make Dr. Brook question some of the recent testimony by children in court.
Do you think there are dozens of people in jail now who are totally innocent?
Yes, I do.
The researchers' findings are only beginning to be heard in courtrooms. Most prosecutors still argue that children wouldn't lie. Prosecutors want to put Kelly Michaels back in jail. In a few months, they plan to retry her with the same charges.
I will fight to the end because I am an innocent woman, and I can look anyone in the eye, and if I have to fight to the rest of my life, then I will do that. So I'm prepared for whatever will happen.
You don't sound scared.
No, I'm not scared. I'm angry and I'm outraged, but I'm not scared.
The Sousas are planning an appeal of their own. Like Kelly Michaels, they believe a day will come when the courts and their grandchildren realize the truth.
When those kiddos grow up, when they become adults, they're going to realize that these things never happened between Shirley and I and them. And I know that they're going to realize that. Because they're bright children, and they have a mind of their own. And when nobody's prompting them, when they grow up, they can remember and will embrace.
Well, John, you know, I remember I first worried about this sort of thing after some of the early cases that we reported. But children can be so convincing. How do we separate out when they're telling the truth from when they're not?
There is no good way. There are all kinds of experts who will testify in court as paid expert witnesses, and they often say they can tell. But Dr. Ceci ran a test where he showed them tapes of kids, some of whom were lying, some were not. And the experts would say, oh, I can tell, but what they said was wrong half the time. In fact, more than half the time. So they did worse than chance.
Clearly, there are real cases of sexual abuse of children. We have to address that.
Yes, and Dr. Ceci won't testify on behalf of the defense because he's afraid he'll let a real molester off because of this. But it's important not to influence the children, and Ceci says to test an alternative hypothesis. In other words, to ask the child, well, Joe did this to you, and then what did Jane do to you? If the child starts talking about more people, then at least you have a reason to be suspicious.
Thank you, John.